Good afternoon, members. Today we're very lucky to have Kumar Sangakkara, former captain of all three formats for the Sri Lankan cricket team, second highest international run scorer, and the first non-English person to be the chair of the MCC. Please join me in warmly welcoming him. So I think I'll get straight into it. So how did you start playing cricket? Was cricket always the sport that you loved? Who did you watch growing up?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. Being a has-been cricketer, applause are always nice. It does my ego a world of good. I started cricket seriously quite late. I played cricket from a very young age. I was born in a small city in the Central Hills, and then moved to Kandy, where I grew up and lived most of my formative years until I finished school. And I went to a Christian missionary school, very much based on public schools here. So we had to take part in almost all the sports that you were good at or had an affinity to. And I played tennis mostly. Started with badminton, which I soon realized some people don't consider a sport. But I swam, so I did quite a few things. And the only reason why I chose cricket at the back end was that all my friends played cricket. It's a lot more fun than a solitary sport like tennis. But it was interesting growing up in an environment where I had very different parents. My father was very insistent on whatever I did well. So he took it upon himself to coach me in cricket and tennis or any other sport I picked. And he did that to my siblings as well. And his methods were so good that two of my siblings basically said, no more, we're out. You concentrate on the two who have accepted these coaching methods. And so that was basically, growing up in sport, and I had my mother who was very insistent that I tried my best at academic work. So it was this constant kind of tug of war between my parents, and it was very interesting, and the choice to start playing cricket from a young age, being a Sri Lankan, was quite natural. And then I left school to go to university, and I grew up in a strange time in Sri Lanka. There was war, there was an uprising, a Marxist uprising from the universities in the rest of the island. Schools and universities were closed for many, many years. And then I had to wait 2 years to start reading my degree at university, and I used those 2 years to play cricket for a club. And I wasn't I was a good school cricketer, but I wasn't, I wouldn't, if anyone saw me play in those years, no one would have said that I would have represented my country or gone anywhere with my cricket. But I think it was by the time I was about 1920 that I became slightly better and then managed to make a career out of it.
And so obviously you mentioned that you were quite late to becoming a professional player. Why do you think that didn't affect you adversely, that you were able to still sort of develop? Do you think you're just a late learner, or did you work extra hard when you got into professional?
I was late in learning. I think that's probably the story of my life in many things that I did, but it's a strange one. I think it is basically the influence of my parents, especially my father, in terms of talent, and it's a bugbear of mine when I was later captaining Sri Lanka and then talking to selectors, and I work in cricket right now with the Indian Premier League, and we talk about talent and potential. It's such an overused term because everyone's got talent and potential. How do you refine that into ability? How do you actually quantify talent and potential? So many people go through life without getting anywhere close to that initial potential or talent that someone else might perceive or they themselves might perceive in them. To me, if I'm really honest, was I talented? Yes. Was I super talented? Definitely not. Was I talented or more talented than some? Yes, but not everyone. I just feel that my learning curve accelerated or was quite steep immediately after I was more self-aware. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons I've learned playing cricket, is that improvement and my ability to deal with situations, my own emotions, to understand what made me better came when I understood myself better, how I dealt with emotion, how I dealt with success, failure, how I formulated a strategy and a plan that suited me, and that would pay dividends. It took me a while. I remember my father telling me that change is inevitable. If you stay still, you're left behind or you get lost. So always remember to change, and that's something that stayed in my mind constantly right throughout. And he always said that you never stop learning. But so much so that when I was young, he would throw me a book at the start of a week, and it could be anything from, Tolstoy's War and Peace to Carlos Castaneda talking about hallucinogenic plants and power plants, as they call, as they went on a trip of self-discovery with the use of drugs. And I was reading these books, strangely, when I was quite young, and he would say, questions on Friday. And it's the same with cricket. When I picked up sport, he said, forget learning the techniques of it. You have to understand the culture, the history, the traditions, what makes this sport so attractive to you, and why you can fall more deeply in love with and develop a much deeper passion for it. So much so that by the time I was in my 12th or 13th year as an international cricketer and having captained the country, I would be awakened up in Australia at about 2, 3 in the morning, or later, with a phone call from reception saying there's an urgent fax for you from home. And I would panic. I would think something's happened to a sibling or my parents, they're ill, what's going on? And then I would stop and think, why a fax? When there are mobile phones, which I carry, why a fax? And the answer was, that's my father, because he doesn't understand time zones when he's fixated on something. And he's a lawyer by profession. And I would immediately know what it was about. And I would tell reception, could you please slip whatever that fax is under my door? And it would be slipped under my door. And the next day would be a game. And I would find a chapter or a page from Don Bradman's book on batsmanship with sentences or paragraphs underlined and highlighted saying, please read this before you go into bat tomorrow. And so I was brought up to question, to learn, and not just question others, question myself as to what can I do to get better? How do I find an edge? And the strange thing is, like in life, there are certain fundamentals that you get used to, that you take for granted. And unfortunately, some of those fundamentals are very counterproductive to improvement and betterment. It's the same with me in my cricket and my technique, not just myself personally in terms of character and my values. In cricket, I've changed most of the fundamentals that everyone said should never be changed. And that's actually kept me ahead of the curve when I did play. So it was not a case of being a late learner. I think it was more a case of being late to that stage of self-awareness that allowed me to learn the right way, to plan better and to get better. And it really helped me, not just at that time, but to deal with a lot of the things that come with being in the public eye, being an international sports person, having to raise yourself both on and off the field, in your professional life and personal life, to a standard that you set for yourself. It also helped me to differentiate between two very important things, which is skill and identity. A lot of the times I used to introduce myself as a cricketer. I still the former cricketer, but that used to be my skill. But what's my identity? What am I beyond that? I play cricket for a very, very limited period of time, but is that the be-all and end-all of me as a person? What do I do after? What makes me a cricketer? What do I do while playing? How does my character, my belief, my philosophy on life, on relationships, how does that impact what I do? And those are all the questions, I think, that when you do answer them, it's strangely powerful in the way it impacts your skill. And I was very lucky to have relationships, both personally, my wife is here, and with my parents, my siblings, friends, coaches, teachers, all of them, that really allowed me to make that differentiation and understand that. And I think those were kinds of the lessons I learned that made me learn better, learn quicker, and become better.
And so you talked a lot about the things you did to personally improve. When you became captain in 2009, what was different about sort of having to then suddenly also being responsible for the ability and the fate of the team and building an identity? And how did you, particularly I think you had quite a difficult start, failing to reach knockout in the ICC Champions Trophy and then also a Tour of India, which I think a few people here would be quite happy with, maybe some not so. How did you sort of get over those rough periods in captaincy?
I think it's a constant disappointment, failure. It's nothing to get too mired, consumed by, as long as you understand how to first emotionally deal with it and then to plan better so as to avoid it or avoid a greater volume of it in your career. In terms of becoming a captain or becoming a leader, it's interesting. I saw leadership quite differently at the start, and then later, I think by the time it was too late and I've given up the captaincy, I saw it slightly differently. To me, leadership is stewardship, is service to engender and enhance and to empower. Leadership and stewardship is such an important part, especially in the context of Sri Lankan cricket. 2009, when I took over the captaincy, the latter half was when the war ended in Sri Lanka. It was a very strange time. There was hope, there was despair, there was confusion. What next for the country? And cricket in Sri Lanka, over the years, ever since the beginning of the war, has stood for something much more than sport. So all the cricketers who represented Sri Lanka through those troubled times had an extra responsibility, and it still follows to this day. We weren't looked upon just as sports persons. We were looked at to be kind of an inspiration, a smaller representation of an ideal Sri Lanka. And it's sometimes silly to think that sport could be more than what it is, or should it be more than what it is. And I would say in a time like this, perhaps not. I mean, in Sri Lanka, sport, cricket especially, was escapism. Escape the realities of life, what happens, war, bomb blasts, economic crises, whatever. It was also entertainment. We were entertainers. But we represented a far more kind of deeper yearning of the people to have that same kind of ownership, that same diversity and the togetherness, the difference that melded into one team, like almost a family, and that played together. And when we won trophies or we won games, I think the way we were received was as if we had achieved something far more than just a victory on the field. And this continued from then to 2009. And so in sense of leadership, I think when you captain Sri Lanka, there was an extra dimension to it. And it's not an easy place to be, but it's also a very privileged position to be in, where you had to be conscious of your social duty. You had to be conscious of the context that you played in and what was at stake. And I think a lot of the Sri Lankan players did that extremely well. And when you captain, and when I captained in terms of leadership and dealing with failures, it was, you look at the people in Sri Lanka, and you look at, and this word resilience is very tiresome because it's used so much today to explain away anything that you have to face and get over. But in Sri Lanka, what the people had to deal with, socially, politically, economically, in terms of natural disasters, all of it combined, a failure on the cricket field, it's absolutely insignificant in a way. But the pride that we took in representing the people of Sri Lanka, who had gone through so much and looked to us for something more, was something very moving and powerful to us. And we had that understanding very much in our minds. That support, the passion, the applause I said before, it all meant something a lot more than when I played. And that passion for the sport has not changed. But I think for us, it was very easy to stay real, to understand winning and losing. But with that love and that understanding, that kind of the adoption of us as a real integral part of Sri Lankan society, the community, really inspired us to do a lot better than we should have. And we punched above our weight for many, many years as a result. So as a captain, I don't think that it made my life any harder to instill that in the team, because the team already had that. And my job was to steward it, to leave it better for having played in it, and leave the culture of the team enhanced for me having played a part in it.
And when you talk about the culture of the team, do you also think that the culture of Sri Lankan cricket's improving? Your speech on the spirit of cricket, the Kadri lecture, has been widely praised for holding to account some of the finance and administration behind the scenes. Do you think that substantive change has happened or is happening? Are you sort of optimistic?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure words always have the intended meaning of bringing about quick change or change at all. I think it needs activism and action behind it. And speaking is very easy, and I did the easy part of talking about it, and also talking about it for a couple of, maybe a paragraph in terms of their written speech. I think there's no visibility in terms of public scrutiny or to public scrutiny that allows us to make any estimation that those institutions have got better. The structures that were the same in those years have stayed very much similar, with slight improvements, tweaks here and there, maybe to mask the reality of where it is now. And it's not been great for Sri Lankan cricket. For many years, I've heard the refrain in Sri Lanka, as you would in many institutions that don't want change: why should we change something that has brought us success? Unfortunately, that was in 1996 and sporadically throughout until 2014 in terms of on-field success. But it is a system that is broken in terms of cricket, that needs fixing, that needs quick fixing as well. But it needs a concerted effort by all stakeholders involved: the players, the public, the media, the office bearers in terms of the home boards, all of them, to have an enlightened vision as to what needs to be done. And unfortunately, it seems to be a representation of what has happened countrywide over the last years as well. And cricket in Sri Lanka for many years been very politicized. All aspects of life in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, is. And perhaps in the world now, more and more, it's applicable to all countries. So I wouldn't say that it has changed. It had shown signs of change, but at the same time, the resistance has been greater to that change, unfortunately. And those are things that need fundamental changes in attitude. And you talked about leadership. I think that's crying out for an enlightened leadership with vision and accountability and transparency. I hope we get there, and I think we will, but I'm not sure when.
Well, talking about leadership and vision, we were talking just before the interview started about your role with the MCC, and what are your hopes for the future of cricket in this country, and in order to get greater engagement? We've seen the 100 recently coming in to try to sort of boost young people's engagement. Are you confident of these and the Road to Lords we were talking about, are you confident of these programs to try to boost cricketing engagement in this country?
Well, if you take the data and the statistics, it says that it's improving. I think one of the alarming statistics I saw is that less than 1% of state school children play any competitive sport. Cricket's an interesting sport because there's a huge barrier to entry in terms of facilities and the expense in terms of getting yourself kitted out to play the sport. With the advent of the 100 and all the efforts taken around not just MCC, but the ECB in general, of a more inclusive arena, more inclusive in terms of dressing rooms, in terms of opportunity, in terms of mindset, and opening up cricket for actually everyone, and doing very, very targeted programs to bring the wider, larger English community in to the sport has been very, very good. And the 100, we've seen how amazing it's been for women's cricket. If you take the viewing numbers, over 40% of viewers are new to the game. They're young boys and girls and women and so many other parts of spectators and audiences who basically identifies as everyone. So it's a very interesting stage where cricket is at worldwide, but especially in the UK. And I think especially women's cricket is on the cusp of really exploding and having exponential growth. And we're talking about the Road to Lords and the role of MCC. I always look at anything in terms of inspiration and relevance. If you lose relevance in anything that you do, you lose your place. You die out. It's the same for sport, same for MCC, an old and august institution, but it has to stay relevant, and this entire drive and move is to be relevant and to inspire. And how and who do you inspire is ultimately the question. Is it reserved for a very few, or are you going to try and inspire the wider community to become involved in this sport that offers so much opportunity, so much enjoyment, so much in terms of relationships and connection? And I think not just MCC, I think it's the larger role of all of us who've been involved in the game, involved in various ways after retirement, to play a part in that inspiration. And we always seem to have a very, very narrow outlook sometimes in terms of how it affects me or my friends or my family, and or the membership. But we lose sight of a far more important and more powerful consequence in terms of how it impacts the larger community, because ultimately the relevance should be to everyone.
Oh, absolutely. As a old institution ourselves, thank you for coming, trying to keep us relevant as well, and hopefully inspiring lots of people here today and on our YouTube. So my final question before I open up to the floor is, what's been the highlight of your very long career?
Been quite a few, and some pleasant, some not so pleasant. On the field, highlights, reaching, 5 World Cup finals and winning only one of them. All 5 were highlights, but 4 of them were not highlights in terms of viewing it over and over again. Luckily, in one of my last World Cups, I managed to be part of a team that got over the line. I think overall, I don't know whether any of them, I think they're important for a while. I have no memorabilia at home that reminds me of the time I played cricket. I'm not sure where my World Cup winning medal is. I definitely didn't keep the ones that I was runners-up in. But it's strange because I, for some reason, have no attachment to memorabilia. I have none. People ask me for shirts for charity or anything that I've had in the past, and they don't believe me when I say that I have nothing to give. And so I'm not sure. I think outside of that, I've had many memorable moments, with my wife, with my family, with my children, which, when I look back, seem to be far more relevant to where I am now than the cricket that I played. I consider it something that allowed me to have the life that I have now and the opportunities I have now. But in terms of significance, I think it's far too early for me to look back and say that was the most significant time in my life. I've had great moments. I've had disappointments. I've had regrets, but nothing really that I can't live with. They're all things that I count very fortunate to have had, that varied experiences that have gone so far in making me who I am now, in bringing me here, and to meet all of you and to speak in front of you. So I'll wait and see if there are. I hope there are more that'll trump some of them. But I'm very fortunate to have had a very, very good life up to now.
All right. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, you just at the end of the first row. Yeah.
Hi, Sangakkara. Thank you for joining us this evening. You mentioned the values that your father inculcated within you, which was very heartening to hear. So I would like to ask you, I saw the World Cup final in 2007 against Australia, and then the one in 11 against India. You lose these finals, and at the face of failure and adversity, what is the role of family? What is the role of your loved ones, your wife, your father, your mom? All those people have to lift you up, to lift your spirits. And I also like to know, what did your father tell you when you eventually won that 2014 World Cup against India, which I was lucky to witness from Dhaka. I'm from Bangladesh, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think, for me, family, friends, everyone's about having a very healthy support structure. Dealing with failure is about your coping mechanisms and how much you can take personally. It's always nice to be able to share your experiences with, and that burden with, people who really love you and understand you, that you feel safe with. And it allows you to see different perspectives and learn from it, so that the burden that you carry is eased. I think losing a final it's a strange one. It's disappointing from a personal perspective, from a team perspective, from the perspective of the fans and the country that supports you. But at the same time, looking forward is a daunting task, because if you lose a final of a World Cup, you understand that it's a 4-year wait for you to be able to recreate that opportunity, and if it'll ever happen at all. So it's just this kind of note of almost finality to it. And in terms of my family, at all times, I've been, like I said before, I've been very fortunate, because they had a lot of love for me, and they had an understanding of what I did, but they were never consumed by me being a cricketer. And in Sri Lanka, it's a strange. I think if you go to Bangladesh and most of the Asian countries, if you go to India, Pakistan, the way they view a cricketer is very, very different. There's very little opportunity, if you're an Indian cricketer, for you to have any kind of normalcy in your everyday life. You cannot walk the street. You cannot go to the shops, do anything that is normal. There's always 1,000, 2,000 people that flock around you. In Sri Lanka, we are islanders, we're very different. We really live for the day in terms of how we enjoy our sport. And so we don't take ourselves or cricketers too seriously. I have 3 siblings. The oldest, my sister, would call me up in the middle of a test match and say, "You haven't come home for lunch. Why don't you and your wife and the kids come home for lunch tomorrow?" I said, I really can't do this, because she said, "Why? What are you doing that's so important?" I said, "Well, I'm playing a test match for the country." And then she'd go, "Well, when do you finish?" I said, "It'll take another 4 days." And she'd go, "Why that long?" And then she said, "All right, when you finish this thing, you come home for lunch." And it's the same with my father in terms of how he viewed my cricket. He would be much happier me batting technically well for 15 runs than scoring what he called an ugly 100. And the winning a World Cup or anything of the sort was never high in his idea of what I could do. To me, it was about me developing as a cricketer, and he had his own idea of what that standard is. And unfortunately, it was a standard of perfection which is unattainable. But I think all of that allowed me to have that kind of a reality check every time I got a little bit too big for my boots or thought I was all that. And I had a great support structure in terms of that to keep me real, to deal with both, not just the disappointments of a final, but also those of winning one and then carrying on with it. And 2013, I was having a wonderful year, and I got a call from my father, and he said, "What are you doing playing cricket still?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You played this for 15 years. It's time you stopped." Or 13 years. It's time you did something else. I thought he'd lost it. And I got quite angry. I told my wife as well. I said, "I think my father's gone off his head. He's asking me to retire when I've had one of the best years in cricket." And I had a chat with her that night, and she actually said, "Well, I think he's quite right. You're at the back end of a career. You're not getting any younger. And perhaps it's time to really think of what are you going to do? Plan the rest of your life out." And so those kinds of reality checks kind of really helped me to deal with all of that. And that, to me, was the role of my family and friends.
Yes, you in the blue shirt. The blue stripy shirt. Yeah, there you go.
So the Cowdrey Lecture has been considered as one of the most pivotal moments in cricket history to even deliver as an active player. There's 2 questions behind this. The first question is, what inspired you to deliver that speech? And the second part is, since you're in the Oxford Union right now, what is the key message that you would like to be delivered in this place?
That's one easy question, and the second one is quite a difficult one. Well, to answer your first, when I was invited to deliver the Cowdrey Lecture, I kind of knew what it was, but I didn't have any great understanding of it. Nor did I really care to understand anymore. So when the president of MCC at the time, Christopher Martin Jenkins, he passed away a few years after that, invited me, I said no. I said, "I'm not going to do it." And then he kept chasing me for some reason. And he really wore me down until I said yes. And I was in the middle of a tour, had no idea what I'd gotten myself into. I then started to understand and trying to understand, read up on it, watch other lecturers. And it's not easy following certain characters and individuals who've come and delivered the Cowdrey Lecture, from Desmond Tutu to various other dignitaries, cricket and non-cricketing. So I started panicking. And then I started thinking, what should I speak about? Cricket is boring at times, right? There's only so much that you can talk about when it comes to cricket. So I decided I'll just talk about the spirit of cricket as I saw it growing up in my country and how that affected me and my fellow teammates and my family, my friends, and the people that I knew or didn't know, the public. And that's how I formulated my talk. It was from a very personal perspective. I spoke about what it meant to be Sri Lankan and play cricket as a Sri Lankan, what our hospitality meant, what our people meant to me, And I only finished writing the ending of it about half an hour before I was due to leave to deliver the lecture. And the real inspiration to deliver it well was about the half a bottle of sake I had at lunch, getting ready to go and deliver it. But the inspiration behind it was actually the people I knew and my perspective from my childhood to that time on how I lived in Sri Lanka, played cricket for Sri Lanka, and how I made these connections with the people. In terms of my message for the Oxford Union and all of you, I have not really thought about that. But as an institution that provides a platform for people to go out and search for wisdom, as an institution that provides an education, tools for life, and a deeper learning and understanding of your own passions and your own leanings in terms of an education. I hope that you have the strength to keep thinking freely, openly, critically, and that all of you acquire wisdom. I think wisdom is something that is far deeper and different to what you learn in terms of your education. And I hope all of you find that, and that journey that we're all on. So I would probably say that's what I can really say to all of you.
Let's go for the member in the black quarter zip.
Hi, Mr. Sangakkara. Thanks so much for coming to speak to us today. My question is, given the rise of factors such as the growth in global franchise T20 cricket and also the growing financial disparity between boards such as India, Australia, England versus the rest of the world, where do you see the future of Test cricket heading, and is this something that worries you?
Well, it's quite a specific question for cricket fans, I think. And a question that greater minds than mine have been grappling with for quite a few years, and we're not any closer to finding an answer. I think what the problem is that we use the word balance a lot, and balance immediately implies that everything is in perfect harmony and coexists really well with each other. You can't have perfect balance. What you need is to understand what needs to give so that cricket can be enjoyed by everyone. And everyone means not only at a competitive level, but it's also for the consumer and the fan. Because at the end of the day, without a platform and without a fan base, there's no sustaining any sport. So what do the fans want? What level of cricket do they want? In England, the average age of a cricket fan is 47 plus and climbing. It's the same in Australia. So where is the relevance of what we do to a younger generation and newer generation with amazingly new and varied and different ideas about what they want and how they want it? So cricket has to adapt. And Test cricket is quite a strange thing. If you talk to players around the world, everyone wants to play more Test cricket, knowing full well that it can't be sustained. All the home boards, the ICC, everyone wants. Test cricket is the ultimate format. But for whom? Is it the ultimate format for fans? If that's the case, are we listening to the one group that should be telling us what they want, and we as players should be adapting and changing to that? So I think the conversation and the battle will continue, but the ability to sustain those formats will depend on finance and the viability of all the boards. The big countries like India that earn $6.2 billion from 5 years of IPL, to countries like Zimbabwe who barely eke out an existence in terms of TV rights for their cricket. And it's hard to equalize that unless the bigger countries, the ICC, are all willing to contribute back into a pot that helps sustain the game. A lot of the time, the cry from around the world and home boards is the players should make the noble choice of devoting more time to their countries, devoting more time to playing national cricket, test cricket. My counter to that is, why ask the players to make a noble choice when the controlling bodies refuse to make that noble choice themselves and to commit more to what is needed for the fans, the players, and the game at large. So we'll wait and see, but it's going to be an interesting ride for the next few years.
Let's go with the member just here on the front row.
Thank you for the lovely talk. As a fellow Sri Lankan, I feel very proud when I meet non-Sri Lankan fans who are supporting cricket, Sri Lankan cricket. So I get a massive sense of pride. My question for you is, Kumar, throughout your career as a cricketer, I'm sure you met many non-Sri Lankan fans who've supported Sri Lankan cricket. What's your most memorable moment of that? What has made you feel, wow, I really am proud to be playing Sri Lankan cricket? Thanks.
I think an event was the '96 World Cup that for the first time I realized that we've broken free of all the shackles that we've had in terms of the history and tradition of cricket in Sri Lanka from being a colonial import to actually for us finally breaking free, finding our own feet, our own brand and playing cricket our way. The Sri Lankan brand of cricket was finally there for everyone to see. Whereas before, we were the Calypso cricketers, equivalent to the West Indies cricketers before the advent of Clive Lloyd and Viv Richards. And if you watch the movie Fire in Babylon, it talks of the social context in which that separation and the differentiation of what they were to what they became in the 70s and 80s took place. It's the same for Sri Lanka. We were very talented cricketers who played a very foreign, I mean, it was inculcated in us, I think, to understand that a certain way of playing the game and being the ideals of sportsmanship, all of that inculcated was very alien to us. But we persevered in that line for many a year, unable to break free. And when we did, that was when the Arjuna Ranatunga led 96, the mid-90s to the late 90s, really broke away from that tradition and established a Sri Lankan way of cricket. And that, I think, made the whole world fall in love with Sri Lankan cricket. And I came across so many times where if you're playing in a World Cup and a side that a certain fan or group of fans supported were out of the tournament, they would don a Sri Lankan shirt and support Sri Lanka. And that was how we were viewed. And I think it's also because, again, like I said, we didn't really take ourselves too seriously in terms of stardom or being something more than what we were. So we were quite real in that sense. And I think it was strange that the brand of cricket we played was very attractive to a huge cross-section of cricket fans from around the world. I can't remember a specific instance, but I've seen so many times country fans that come in, you know, from other countries that come not just to Sri Lanka, but travel to watch us play in some of the countries that we toured. So that was quite heartening. But I'm sorry, I can't give you a single instance.
That's fine, thank you.
Yes, this from over there.
Okay, hi Kumar, thank you so much for the talk today. My question actually is about Sri Lankan cricketers and the kind of political statements they make, especially in the wake of Aragalaya that's been going on from last year, the current crisis in Sri Lanka, and just the insane political instability that we're still facing today. And I know that when you and a lot of cricketers came out to Gota Gogama in support of the protests, it made a huge political statement. So could you speak a little bit to kind of what you think the onus is or the obligations of sports people are to their communities in times of crisis, in terms of making political statements? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think it was my wife more than I who was on the streets for quite a long time during the protests. I was away in India for a while. I visited when I went back very briefly. It's a strange thing, separation of sport and politics, that has been the cry for so many years. In Sri Lanka, and I think more and more now around the world, it becomes intertwined. In Sri Lanka, sports and politics has always, for some reason, had a very interdependent relationship. This is unhealthy. But I think having grown up through the years of war and understanding the pride of place that Sri Lankans had for this sport, not because it was a sport, because it, like I said before, it represented something more. We have an obligation to try and speak up for the larger good. And it's a strange thing when you sit down and you consider what to say and how to say it. And you don't always get it right. But the point is, you have to represent someone when you play. And if you're a professional cricketer, you sign a contract with the cricket board, an official contract. And because of how our sports law is constructed, the cricket board is under the auspices of the sports minister. So your control through that contract extends beyond just the cricket board. However, your real contract is with the people of the country that you play for, because you don't represent the board, you don't represent the sports minister, you represent the country. So your responsibility is to your fellow citizen. And cricketers in Sri Lanka are not above or beyond the problems, the crises that the people face. And you have to face them along with the people. You are insulated quite a lot from them because the financial returns, the positions that you're in, allow you that buffer. So what do you do with that privilege, and what do you do with the voice and platform that you have? My wife continuously tells me that I have done very little. And there are times, and many a times now, that I agree with her that I perhaps should have done more. And I think this is the time in our country now, having seen what's happened with Aragale, having seen what's happened with a larger involvement of our youth in political discourse, in standing up against policy and politics and politicians that have been negatively impactful to the country. Where do we go next? How do you change the system? Everyone will say politics is dirty, do not get involved, but without the involvement of these young leaders that I saw, the activists that were out there, the real question is, how do you now take that social movement, the call for change, and convert it into one that is impactful in our political system? How do you change what has been to something that's better? It's not going to happen overnight, but it is a fight worth committing to. And in terms of all the statements that cricketers have made over the years with various aspects, what's really needed is work and commitment and the actual mucking in and really working hands-on in that arena. I don't think I'm capable of that, but I think a lot of the youth now are. And our job is to support that and to invite that and to be a part of the journey and to do as much as we can for the country that we are from, because it is a country definitely worth fighting for. It's a country that's given me everything. And I think this is the time, the window of opportunity in the next 6 to 10 years is where I think that involvement must come, because the doors are closing fast. And I hope that all of us, all the young leaders, don't allow that door to be closed in our faces. Because when it does, the grind back to get that little opening for us to influence the country, or for the young leaders today, the youth to influence the country, to get it to where it can go, is going to be much harder than it is now.
I think we have time for one more question. The member in the maroon jacket has been very patient.
Thank you, Sangha, for coming here and talking to us. It's been a pleasure to hear you speak. We spoke about listening to fans, and you said there are two sets of fans. One, younger fans, which are sort of craving for more cricket, and we want to give them the cricket that they would love to see. And one, some of us who have grown up watching cricket and sort of purists who love and die for Test cricket. So in between these two, where do you see the state of ODI cricket going forward as we take cricket and make it a global force? Because in the past, growing up in 90s and 2000s, we have seen some great bilateral series in ODI, NatWest series, the Commonwealth Bank Tri-Series. But recently, as a cricket fan, I've observed there's a dying trend in ODI cricket, especially in bilateral series as well. So where do you see the future of ODI cricket going forward? Thank you.
Again, very complex. Again, it's about relevance, and bilateral ODI series seems to have lost a lot of the luster, but the interest in the benchmark tournaments like the World Cup remains very high. Do we allow the franchises that have now proliferated in cricket to run cricket in terms of T20 on a franchise basis, where you get together every 4 years to play a World Cup like in football? Or do we find a better system of raising the public interest in those formats that are dying? Or not dying, I think that's too harsh a statement, but where interest is waning. It's a lot to do with the scheduling, a lot to do with TV rights, a lot to do with not having the time for a lot of the fans to watch so much cricket in such large quantities and commit so much time to it. There's so many different things at play. It's very hard to find one singular answer to that. But I think it's a debate and a consideration that everyone's having. And you're never going to find a perfect answer. But I think down the years, while trying to answer this, there might be an organic progression towards what ultimately is relevant. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think it'll happen in the next 3 to 4 years. But the answer will become clearer, and perhaps we might not have to make that decision. It might be made for us.
Well, thank you very much, Kumar, for addressing us today. Before we give you a round of applause, could I just ask everyone to stay seated until Kumar and his guests have left the chamber? So thank you very much.